You're crouched by a fire. It's 50,000 BC. The wind shifts. Smoke rolls straight into your face. And instead of coughing and backing away like every sane creature before you, something in your brain says, wait. Not wait, that's bad. Wait, that felt like something. That's the moment this video is actually about, not when humans started smoking. Why? Because the when is a timeline. The why is a question about what's wired into your skull right now that made a burning plant feel like a reward instead of a warning. And the answer involves your brain's oldest reward system, a drive some scientists think is as fundamental as hunger and thirst, elephants getting drunk on purpose, and a very inconvenient truth about why humans have never, in the entire history of the species, stopped trying to alter their own minds. Let's start with the dumbest, most elegant explanation for why any of this happened at all. Your brain was already built to say yes. Every mammal brain has an endocannabinoid system. It's not there because of cannabis. It evolved for reasons that have nothing to do with smoke. It regulates mood, appetite, memory, stress response, pain. It existed millions of years before any human ever burned a leaf on purpose. Which means when smoke containing cannabinoid compounds first drifted into a human's lungs, the brain wasn't encountering something foreign. It was encountering a key that happened to fit a lock that was already there. Nobody designed this. The receptor system already existed for internal biological reasons, and the plant world, over millions of years of its own evolution, happened to produce compounds that could flip those same switches. Two separate evolutionary stories, running in parallel, until one day a human sat downwind of the wrong bush, and they collided. And when they did, the brain didn't file it under danger. It filed it under again. So here's the first honest answer, because their brains were never neutral about it in the first place. The desire wasn't invented, it was discovered. But reward alone doesn't explain why this became a ritualized practice, passed down and refined across every continent. For that, we need to talk about pain. Because long before smoke was pleasure, smoke was medicine. Put yourself in the position of any human before antibiotics, before surgery, before germ theory. All you have is observation. And observation taught ancient people something specific. Smoke reaches the lungs directly, and whatever's in it goes with it. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text from around 1550 BC, describes inhaling smoke from heated herbs for throat and lung ailments. Hippocrates wrote about inhaling herbal vapors for respiratory disease. Ayurvedic medicine in India developed dhumapana, medicinal smoke inhalation, with specific herbs prescribed for specific conditions. None of these civilizations were in contact with each other. Egypt didn't teach Greece. Greece didn't teach India. These are independent discoveries of the same principle arrived at over and over again, which tells you this wasn't a cultural fluke. Some inhaled compounds genuinely do have real pharmacological effects on the respiratory system. It worked often enough that it became embedded medical knowledge, passed down not in writing, but lived, watched, repeated. Why number 2, desperation plus observation. When you're sick and something makes you feel even slightly better, you don't need to understand the mechanism. You just need it to work often enough to try it again. Now here's where it gets genuinely wild, because pleasure and medicine still don't explain the scale of this. Humans across every inhabited continent independently went looking for ways to alter their own consciousness on purpose. And they weren't the only species doing it. In the 1980s, UCLA psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel proposed that the drive to seek intoxication is a fourth biological drive, right up there with hunger, thirst, and reproduction. Not a human quirk, an animal one. Elephants deliberately seek out overripe, fermented marula fruit and eat enough to become visibly intoxicated. Reindeer in Siberia eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms for their psychoactive effects. Birds have been observed eating fermented berries until they can barely fly straight. This is a pattern across the animal kingdom, in species with no culture, no ritual, no shamans, just brains seeking altered states because something in the reward architecture of a nervous system finds that valuable. Why number 3? Because seeking altered states might not be a human choice at all. It might be a mammalian one, and humans were simply equipped, through fire and hands and cognition, to pursue it more deliberately than any other species on Earth. But that doesn't cover why this became communal. Why did nearly every culture on Earth turn smoke into a shared group ritual instead of a private habit? For most of human history, being cast out of your group was a death sentence. Group cohesion was the entire survival strategy, and anything that reliably strengthened trust between group members had enormous evolutionary value. Shared altered states are an extraordinarily effective way to build that trust. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Shared ritual experiences synchronize neural activity across a group and measurably increase feelings of trust and belonging. Ancient humans didn't know the neuroscience. They just noticed that the group that sat in the smoke together came out of it more bonded, more willing to trust each other with their lives. The Scythians, according to Herodotus, would build small enclosed tents, heat stones red hot, throw hemp seeds onto them, and sit together inhaling the smoke, in his words, howling with pleasure. Archaeologists later excavated Scythian burial mounds and found exactly what he described: bronze braziers, heated stones, hemp residue. This wasn't a private vice. It was architecture for belonging. Why number 4, the ritual smoke circle, was social technology, a tool ancient humans used, without ever writing down a single word of theory, to build the kind of deep group trust that literally kept them alive. There's one more why, and it might be the deepest one, because it isn't about pleasure or medicine or bonding. It's about the fear of the one thing every human has never been able to solve: death. Across an enormous number of ancient cultures, smoke wasn't just inhaled, it was interpreted. It rose, drifted upward, out of reach, toward the sky. To people without any scientific framework for what happens after death, that upward motion was a message. Indigenous cultures across the Americas treated tobacco this way for thousands of years before European contact, used in healing rituals, in communication with the spirit world, in binding agreements. A shaman inhaling smoke wasn't taking a break. He was, as far as his community was concerned, opening a channel between the living and whatever came after. Why number 5? Smoke gave ancient humans something to point at when they tried to make sense of death. And a species this anxious about mortality will hold on to anything that helps with that. Put all 5 together, and you stop having one answer to, why did ancient humans start smoking? You have a convergence, a reward system already built into the brain, a genuine, if crude, medical logic, a drive toward altered consciousness we apparently share with elephants and reindeer, a social technology for building trust, and a symbolic language for confronting the one certainty none of us can avoid. And that convergence is exactly why the story turns dark later. Because once smoking wasn't one behavior, but 5 overlapping ones, you start to understand how easily something that layered could be stripped down to just one of those 5 and sold back to people at scale. When tobacco reached Europe in the 1500s, it arrived as a novelty, and within decades had been reduced to a single dimension: the reward hit, and nothing else. Not the medicine, not the ritual, not the bonding, not the meaning. By the 20th century, an industry had figured out how to isolate that one piece, the fast dopamine hit, and engineer products to maximize it while discarding everything that had made the practice meaningful for thousands of years. They didn't invent the desire, they just found the oldest, most deeply wired yes button in the human brain, and built a machine to press it as many times as possible. A Scythian in a smoke tent and a tobacco executive in 1960 both worked with smoke. That's the only thing they had in common. One was tending to 5 ancient human needs at once, the other stripped it down to a single mechanism and optimized it for profit, at any cost to the people using it. So why did ancient humans start smoking? Because their brains already had the wiring for it. Because it sometimes actually helped when they were sick. Because every mammal nervous system seems to want an altered state occasionally. Because it was one of the most powerful tools they had for building the trust that kept them alive. And because it gave them something to hold on to when they thought about the fact that they were going to die. Every one of those reasons still exists in you, right now, because you're still the same species. The plants have changed, the rituals have changed, the delivery methods have changed, but the 5 reasons underneath, they're not ancient history, they're just older than you thought, and closer than you'd like to admit. Next time you see smoke curling up off a fire, a candle, anything, you're not looking at some strange ancient custom. You're looking at a mirror.